The hall held 400 people. Not one of them was breathing. Marin Cole had dropped between one heartbeat and the next. No warning, no cry. Just a woman in crimson folding toward the marble, like a candle giving up its flame. And the newly marked Alpha, the man every pack in the territory had traveled days to see crowned, was already moving. He cleared 30 steps before anyone else thought to stand. He caught her before she touched the floor. Then he went still, and he did not move again. Not when the elders called his name. Not when the rites stalled and the crown waited. Not when his own people murmured that a leader does not kneel 3 hours for a stranger. 3 hours, through the cold, through the silence, through the long, impossible wait for her eyes to open, because Marin Cole was 24 years old, and she had spent every one of those years being useful to powerful men, sharp, composed, easy to send away. And not one of them had ever looked at her the way this one did now. Like she was not a tool to be spent. Like she was the reason the whole room had gone quiet. The doors opened and the heat reached her first. Not the warmth of comfort. The warmth of too many bodies pressed into one stone hall, of 1,000 candles burning at once, of fire with nowhere left to go. Marin Cole stepped through the high archway and let none of it touch her face. That was the rule. The only rule that had ever mattered. She had been given her instructions in a low voice behind a closed door the night before the long ride south. Observe. Sign the renewal of the old accord. Offer the territory nothing it had not already agreed to give. And above all, feel nothing they could see. Her worth had always been measured in that single thing, her stillness, the way she could sit across from the most dangerous men in the territory and never let her pulse betray her. Never let her eyes give away the smallest want. A useful woman. That was what they called her, when they believed she could not hear them. Useful. She had learned to wear the word like a heavy coat. Warm enough. Never quite hers. The hall swallowed her in a single breath. The ceiling arched so high the candlelight could not climb it, and the top of the room hung in soft, watching darkness. Banners fell from every pillar, deep green and black, each one carrying a wolf worked in gold thread that caught the flames and seemed to move. The air was thick with cedar smoke, and under the smoke something softer, something clean and low and warm, like rain falling on sun-heated stone. Marin breathed it in once, and her chest pulled tight for no reason she could name. She did not like reasons she could not name. A hand settled at her elbow, light, steadying. "You came early," Linnea murmured beside her. "You are never early." I wanted to see the room before it filled. It was a thin lie, and they both knew it. Linnea let it pass the way she let so many things pass, and guided her toward the seats kept for visiting delegates, a raised row along the eastern wall. Marin sat. She smoothed the front of her crimson tunic with steady fingers. She folded her hands in her lap exactly the way a woman who felt nothing would fold them. The room kept filling. And then the room changed. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air, a held breath that moved through 400 people at once, the way wind bends a whole field of wheat in a single, slow wave. A man had appeared at the top of the dais. He was tall, The platform already lifted him above the crowd, and still he seemed to fill the space above it. Broad through the shoulders, dark clothing that drank the candlelight instead of throwing it back. His hair was dark, brushed away from a face built of hard, quiet lines. Soren Vale. She knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. What she did not know was why the sight of him made the marble feel suddenly unsteady beneath her feet. High on the dais, Soren let his gaze move across the hall the way it was meant to move. Slow, even. A leader taking the measure of the people who had come to watch him, bound to the land. He had walked through this hour 100 times in his mind. He had been shaped for it since before he could speak. And then his eyes reached the eastern wall and stopped. He did not know her name yet. He only knew that the noise of the room had gone strangely loud and strangely far away at the same moment, and that the sound had a center now. And the center was a woman in crimson, with her hands folded too carefully in her lap. Something low in his chest pulled. Quiet. Certain. Like a tide deciding which way it would turn. He looked away. A leader did not stare. But the pull did not loosen its hold. The rites began. An elder in green robes lifted his voice, and the old words filled the hall. The promises. The oaths. The bond between the one who would lead and the land he would carry until the end of his days. Maren listened the way she had been trained to listen, cataloging, noting, filing each phrase into its proper place, searching for the small shifts that told a careful ear where the real power leaned. But somewhere beneath the steady work of her mind, something else had quietly begun. A warmth in her palms, a faint hum at the base of her skull, like a struck bell held too close to the ear. She crossed her ankles, uncrossed them, told herself it was the candles, told herself it was the heat of 400 bodies in a room built to keep warmth trapped inside its walls. But the warmth was not coming from the room. It was rising from somewhere behind her ribs, slow, patient, the way the sea climbs a flat shore, so gradually that no one notices how far the water has come until it is already at their feet. She glanced at the dais. Soren Vale stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face composed, his jaw set just a little tighter than before. He was not looking at her. He was looking straight ahead, at the elder, at the ceremony that would shape the rest of his life. But his breathing had changed. She could see it. The faint rise and fall of his chest, faster than it had any reason to be. And the simple fact that she could read his breath from across a crowded room sent the warmth in her own chest surging higher. It was like standing at the edge of the water, not the calm part, not the gentle lapping at the shoreline. The other part, the moment before a great wave reaches you, when the sea pulls back and the sand shifts under your heels, and there is a single breathless second where you know something enormous is coming, and you cannot move. The elder lifted the mark of the Alpha. Soren Vale knelt. The whole hall went still, and the old man pressed the mark to him with both hands, and the final words were spoken into the silence, and then it was done. The room broke open. 400 voices rose at once, a wall of sound that struck the stone and came back doubled. Maren felt it in her teeth, in her ribs, in the soles of her feet. Soren rose to his full height, and he looked at her. Not at the delegates, not at the eastern wall. At her, at Maren Cole, sitting in the third row, with both hands pressed flat against her chest, like a woman trying to hold something inside her body that was fighting to get out. His eyes were the deep green of river water in shadow, and the thing she saw in them was not the calm of a leader receiving the love of his people. It was recognition. Across all that space, across all those people, as if he had been waiting his whole life to find one particular face in one particular crowd, and had just found it. And then the wave broke. It rose inside her so fast and so high that her sight blurred at the edges. Heat poured through her, out from her chest, down into her stomach, up through her throat, out to the very tips of her fingers. The roar of the crowd thinned to something distant, the way voices sound when you slip beneath the surface of deep water. A hand closed on her arm. Linnea. Saying her name, maybe. The sound did not reach her. Her mouth opened, to say she was fine, to say it was nothing, to say, "Give me a moment." No sound came out. The swell did not fall back. It built, layer over layer, a pressure that did not hurt, but was simply too vast for one body to hold. Her whole world narrowed to a single point of green. His eyes, still fixed on hers, steady and stunned and certain, and then the floor tilted sideways beneath her, and the light went out. The first thing was the warmth, not the heat of the crowded hall. Something steadier than that. Something that wrapped around her and held, the way deep water holds a swimmer who has finally stopped fighting it. Maren did not open her eyes right away. She was aware, in the slow way of someone surfacing from far down, of a rhythm beneath her cheek, a heartbeat, slow, even, not her own, and a scent, cedar, and something darker underneath it, like iron and warm skin and rain on stone. The same scent that had reached across 400 people and undone her without a single word. It made the strange tightness behind her ribs hum with a quiet, awful satisfaction. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was wrong. It was not the vaulted stone of the great hall. It was lower, painted soft cream and faded gold. A single iron fixture hung above her, unlit, and all the light in the room came from somewhere to her left. Warm, amber, the slow-breathing glow of a fire. She was not in her chair. She was in someone's arms. The truth of it arrived in pieces, the way truth does when the body understands before the mind agrees to. A broad chest beneath her shoulder, an arm curved around her back, carrying her weight with a steadiness that said it had been carrying that weight for a long time. A heavy cloak, charcoal gray and edged in dark fur, draped over her legs like a blanket she had not asked for, and a hand, resting against her ribs, palm flat, fingers spread wide and still, as if he had spent the last while simply counting her breaths. Maren turned her head. Soren Vale's face was a few inches from her own. He was seated in a wide chair beside the fire in what looked like a private study. The mark of the Alpha sat on him now. She could feel it in the air around him, a new and settled weight. His dark clothing was loosened at the collar. His hair had fallen forward, brushing his temple, the careful order of it gone soft, and his eyes were open, fixed on her, with an expression she could not file into any of the careful drawers she kept inside her. Not concern. Concern was a small, manageable thing. This had edges. "There you are," he said. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of voice that belonged to a room holding only two people. "Stay still. Do not try to sit up yet." Her throat was dry. Her whole body felt heavy and warm, as though she had been sleeping in front of that fire for hours. "What happened?" she managed. "You fainted." "I do not faint." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "You did today." And then the full shape of the situation reached her all at once, cradled against his chest, her head tucked beneath his jaw, her legs drawn up across his lap with his cloak over them. His arm had not loosened by even a breath. A flush climbed her throat that had nothing to do with the fire. "How long?" she started, and her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "How long has it been?" He did not answer at once. His hand pressed a little more firmly against her ribs, and the warmth behind them pulsed once in reply, deep and slow. "3 hours," he said. Maren went very still. 3 hours. More or less. She looked at the chair, at the arm still curved around her, at the way his body was held, not shifted, not rearranged, not eased into a more comfortable shape. Held, exactly as it must have been from the start. "You have been holding me," she said slowly, "for 3 hours." A muscle moved in his jaw. "The healer came," he said. "Your companion came. My steward came. They offered to move you, to carry you to the guest rooms, to bring something to lay you on. And the answer was no." The words settled between them, small and enormous at the same time. Maren stared at him. This close, she could see what the candlelight in the great hall had hidden. The faint lines of strain at the corners of his eyes, the set of his shoulders, locked in one position too long, the shadow of pure exhaustion beneath all that quiet command. 3 hours of holding a grown woman without moving, on the single most important day of his life. Across the room, Soren watched her put it together. He had spent the long silence telling himself there would be a price for this. He knew exactly what it looked like. A newly marked alpha vanishing from his own ceremony with an unconscious envoy in his arms and refusing, flatly, to let her go. He knew what the elders were already whispering beyond that door. And he found, sitting in the firelight with her weight against his chest and her breath finally steady under his palm, that he did not care in the way he was supposed to care. There was a sentence he had read about her weeks before in the dry pages he had been handed about every delegate who would attend. The most composed negotiator in the territory. Cold where it counted. Difficult to move. He had read that line and thought, "We will see." He had not expected to be the one moved. "You missed it," Maren said. "The feast, the whole of it." "Yes, there will be talk. Let them talk. My king will hear of this." "Good," he said, and something in the flat calm of it made her chest tighten again. A knock came at the door. Soren did not move. "Come." An older man stepped inside. His hair had gone fully gray, and he carried himself with the straight back of someone who had served a long time and intended to keep serving longer. A steward's chain hung across his chest. His face was arranged into the careful blankness of a man holding several opinions he had chosen not to speak. "Your delegate's companion is asking to see her," he said. "Send her in, Alder." Linnea appeared a moment later, and Marin watched her oldest companion's face move through relief, then confusion, then something that looked very much like alarm, all in the space of 2 breaths. Linnea crossed the room and knelt beside the chair. Her gaze went to Marin's face, to the arm still wrapped around her, to the cloak over her legs. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No. One moment you were sitting beside me. The next, you were gone. You dropped like a stone." Linnea's voice dropped lower. "And he was off that platform before anyone else had even risen." "Off the platform," Marin repeated, and looked up at Soren. Alder, still by the door, spoke mildly. 30 steps, he said. In under 4 seconds, someone counted. Soren's expression did not change. "Thank you, Alder. The feast continues, Your Grace," the steward went on in the same even tone. "Your absence has been noticed. The Grey Ridge party, in particular, has had a great deal to say about it." Something flickered behind Soren's eyes, brief, cold. Marin caught it. "The Grey Ridge party," she said carefully. For a moment, no one answered. Then Alder, with the faint weariness of a man who had watched this game played many times, said, "Elder Drake escorted the Grey Ridge family here himself. He had certain expectations for the evening, for who the new Alpha might be seen beside once the rites were done." "Alder," Soren said, "he merely thought you should know, Your Grace, that the Lady Sabine was left standing at the high table for some time." The fire cracked in the silence that followed. Marin felt the shape of it land in her chest, cold and clear. She was a delegate. She read rooms for a living. She did not need it spelled out. A new Alpha, a powerful neighboring pack, a daughter placed at his side at his own feast, in front of every elder who mattered, an alliance half-built, waiting only for him to step into it. And instead, he had carried a foreign envoy off the dais and refused for 3 hours to set her down. "You were meant to choose her," Marin said quietly. "Tonight, in front of all of them." Soren met her eyes. "I was meant to consider it. And now, he said, "I am holding you." She should have pulled away. Every instinct she had spent 10 years sharpening told her to pull away, to stand, to put distance and propriety and a closed door between herself and this catastrophe. She did not move. "Send word to the Lady Sabine that the new Alpha thanks the Grey Ridge family for the honor of their presence," Soren said to Alder, without looking away from Marin, "and that the matter they came to discuss will keep for another day." Alder's mouth twitched, the barest movement. "Elder Drake will not take that well." "Elder Drake," Soren said, "may take it however he likes." The steward inclined his head and withdrew. The door closed. Linnea looked from one of them to the other, and her face had gone pale. "Cat," she said softly. the old name slipping out. Do you understand what this looks like? Yes, Marin said. I understand exactly what it looks like. It looked like a breach of neutrality. It looked like the envoy of one territory tangled in the private affairs of another on the very night a new alpha took his place. It looked like an alliance no one back home had authorized, drafting itself out of nothing while she sat there in a stranger's cloak. Her king's voice came to her, cool and certain, from across all that distance. Your value to this court is your detachment. Do not waste it on sentiment. She had nodded when he said it. Of course, detachment was what she did. Detachment was what she was. And now here she sat, unable to make her own arm push away from a man she had never spoken to before this day. I need to speak with my companion, Marin said. Her voice came out steady, diplomatic. She was proud of it. Privately. Soren looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and rose, and the full height of him unfolded above her, taller than she had let herself notice while she lay against him. His arm tightened for half a breath as she shifted off his lap, not holding her back, just a reflex. His body resisting the separation before his mind could overrule it. He released her, and the loss of his warmth hit her like stepping out of a fire-warmed room into deep snow. She caught herself on the arm of the chair. Linnea was there in an instant, steadying her. Soren walked to the door. He paused there, one hand on the frame, and looked back. The study is yours for as long as you need it, he said, and then, lower, in a voice that was almost rough. You read every briefing they put in front of me. Did you know that? I read all of them. Every delegate. Every name. Marin went still. None of the others, he said. Made me read them twice. The door closed behind him. The silence he left behind had a weight to it. In the corridor beyond, Soren stood for a moment with his back against the cool stone and let out a breath he had been holding far longer than 3 hours. He had spent his whole life being watched. He understood, better than most, the cost of being seen wanting something. He had just shown the entire pack and the Greyridge family and Elder Drake and 400 witnesses the exact thing he wanted. A leader was not supposed to do that. A leader was supposed to be unreadable. And yet the only thing in him that felt true, the only thing under all the noise, was the memory of her breath finally evening out beneath his hand, and the way the whole roaring world had quieted the moment she opened her eyes. He did not regret it. That was the part that should have frightened him. He did not. Inside the study, Linnea gripped Marin's hands. Tell me you see it, she whispered. A new alpha walked out on his own ceremony to hold an unconscious foreign envoy for 3 hours. He refused to let anyone take you from him. He just turned a powerful neighbor's daughter away in front of the man who brought her. Cat. The moment word of this reaches home, the king will recall us. I know, and you will spend a long, long time explaining to the council why the new alpha of this territory was holding you. Like... Linnea made a small, helpless motion with her hand. Like you belonged to him. The word landed somewhere deep in Marin's chest. And the warmth there, the swell that had not fully left her since the moment his eyes found hers, answered it. Quiet. Insistent. As if something inside her, some part she had kept locked behind 10 years of careful stillness, had heard the word belonged and said, "Yes." Maren pressed both hands to her face. Her skin was still too warm. She could feel, even now, the phantom weight of his arm around her back, the flat press of his palm counting her breath, the low rasp of his voice. None of the others made me read them twice. For her entire life, the powerful men she served had valued her for one thing: her usefulness, her stillness, the ease with which she could be sent into a room and sent away again when the work was done. Not one of them had ever looked at her the way the man on the other side of that door had looked at her, like she was not a tool to be spent, like she was the reason the whole room had gone quiet. "I need to leave," Maren said, "before this becomes something neither of us can undo." But even as the words left her, the swell in her chest pulled toward the closed door and did not let go. Maren made it as far as the courtyard. Linnea had packed their things in a kind of quiet fury, the way she did everything when she was frightened, folding each item too tightly, smoothing each fold too many times. The carriage stood ready beyond the tall palace doors. The horses shifted in their traces, restless, breathing pale clouds into the cold. The night air carried pine off the mountains, sharp and clean. And far behind her, faint through layers of stone, the sound of the feast still murmured on without the man it was meant to honor. Torches lined the walls, throwing long shadows that wavered across the flagstones. The cold pressed in against her skin, and for once Maren welcomed it. Cold was simple. Cold did not ask anything of her. She walked toward the carriage with her chin level and her hands steady, the way a woman walks when she has already decided something and refuses to let her own body argue with her. She was almost there. Her fingers were nearly on the cold iron of the door handle, and then the swell rose. Not the slow climb she had felt in the great hall, not the patient tide creeping up a flat shore. This came fast. A wave out of nowhere that stole the breath from her lungs and rooted her feet to the stone, so suddenly that her hand froze in the air before it could close on the latch. She heard the footsteps behind her before she heard the voice, not hurried, measured. The steady pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going and had already decided he would arrive there no matter what stood in his way. "Envoy Cole." She did not turn around. "If you came out here to ask me to stay," she said to the dark shape of the carriage, "the answer has to be no, for both our sakes. That is not what brought me out here." His voice was closer now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back, even through the cold, like standing near a banked fire. She turned. Soren stood a few feet away. The mark of the Alpha sat on him like something he had carried far longer than a single evening, settled into the line of his shoulders. The fire glow from the high palace windows caught one side of his face and left the other in shadow. His eyes held hers with a patience that made something in her chest ache in a way she had no name for. "There is a thing happening inside that hall right now," he said quietly, "that you need to hear before you ride away from it. Because once you are gone, it will keep happening, whether you know about it or not." Maren went very still. "Tell me." "Elder Drake has spent this last hour moving from table to table," Soren said, quietly, the way men like him always do their worst work, telling anyone who will lean close enough that what they saw today was no accident. that a seasoned envoy does not simply collapse at a stranger's feet, that she was sent here, placed here, to put a hook into a new alpha before he had the wisdom to know better. The cold seemed to sharpen around her, finding every gap in her tunic. He is calling it a maneuver, Soren went on. Your territory reaching into mine through the one weakness a leader is never supposed to have. A soft place. A want. That is a lie. I know it is a lie. A muscle moved in his jaw. But you of all people, understand that a lie does not have to be true to do its work. It only has to be useful to enough of the right people. She did know. She had spent 10 years in rooms where the truth was the least powerful thing present. She had watched whole accords crumble, not because anyone set out to break them, but because the right rumor reached the right ear at exactly the right hour, and by morning, a thing that had never happened was simply what everyone agreed had happened. And the accord that hung in the balance now was hers. The fragile peace between their two territories. The one her own hands had spent 2 long seasons stitching together, clause by careful clause, laid into more nights than she cared to count. The one her king had sent her south to renew with a polite signature and a cold, untroubled heart. If Drake convinced the council that the new Alpha had been compromised by an enemy envoy, that peace would not see the turn of the season. You understand exactly what he is building, Marin said. I have watched men like him my whole life, Soren said. I understand it the way you understand weather, not because I want to, because it has always been overhead. And you came out here to warn me. He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, the careful steadiness in his voice thinned just slightly, and something raw showed beneath it. I came out here, he said, because I have never once in my life looked at another person and simply known. And I find I am not willing to let that climb into a carriage and vanish into the dark before I have even learned the sound of her voice saying yes to anything at all. The swell surged. She watched his composure crack at the edges, the way thin ice cracks when weight first touches it. His jaw tightened. His hand flexed once at his side, as if it wanted to reach, and he was holding it back by main strength. You feel it too, she said. It was not a question. Since before the mark ever touched me, he said. Everything that came after you walked into that hall became noise. The oaths, the crowd, my own name spoken back to me by 400 voices. Noise. There was only one quiet thing in that entire room, and it was the place where you were sitting. He took a single step closer. Tell me you feel it. That is not fair. I am not asking you to be fair, he said. I am asking you to be honest, just once, with no king listening, no counsel, no briefing telling you what you are permitted to feel. Marin's vision blurred. She blinked hard and forced the heat back from her eyes, and the small effort cost her more than she expected. Some last brick of the wall she had spent a decade building loosened and gave. The wall that kept duty on one side and wanting on the other, that had held through every long negotiation, every cold room, every man who had ever looked through her as if she were furniture that happened to speak. Yes, she breathed. I feel it. I felt it the moment I walked into that hall. I felt it when I woke in your arms. I feel it standing here in the cold, with my hand on a door I am supposed to walk through and cannot seem to open." Her breath shook. "And I have to leave anyway, because feeling it does not change what I am, or what it would cost the people who depend on me. What you are," Soren said, low and certain, "is the only person I have ever looked at and recognized." The word should have made her angry. Recognized. As if she were a thing he had misplaced and found again. She was not property. She was not a treaty to be signed, not a border to be claimed and fenced. She had fought for years against the quiet assumption that a woman in her work was an instrument to be used and then set down, and she had won that fight at a cost no one had ever once thought to count. The word should have sent her into that carriage without a backward glance, but there was something underneath the way he said it. Not possession, not demand. Something closer to a man standing at the edge of morning, pointing east, and simply naming where the light was coming from. A fact too large to argue with. "Stay tonight," he said. "One night, that is all." "Soren, I will not touch you. I will not ask you to spend a single coin of your position. I will give you a room with a door that locks from the inside, and I will sit on the other side of that door, and I will not move from it until you open it, or until you tell me through the wood that you are leaving and that I should let you go." His eyes did not waver from hers, "And if that is your choice, I will let you go. You have the word of an alpha, given on the first night he wore the mark. There is no heavier word I own." Maren looked at the carriage. She looked at Linnea, standing by the horses with her face carefully, deliberately blank, the way she held it in the worst moments of the worst negotiations. She looked up at the sky over the palace, where the first stars were surfacing in a deepening blue that reminded her of nothing and no one, because she had never once stood in this exact place in her entire ordered life, and the future she had planned so precisely had never had the smallest room in it for any of this. She looked back at him. "One night," she said. He kept his word. The room was beautiful, wide and warm, with a fire burning low in a stone hearth and a tall bed half hidden behind heavy curtains. A window looked out toward the dark, folded shoulders of the mountains. She did not look at the bed, and she did not look at the window. She spent the whole of that night sitting on the floor, with her back against the door. He was on the other side of it. She knew because she could hear him breathing, slow, even, endlessly patient, and because the swell in her chest hummed at a low, steady warmth that rose whenever he was near and faded whenever he was not. It had not faded once. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire settled into itself with soft ticks and sighs. The palace beyond the door grew quiet by slow degrees. As the feast finally ended and the great rooms emptied, and the old stone began to give back the day's warmth to the cold. At some point, footsteps approached in the corridor. Maren went still. She heard the low murmur of Alder's voice, and Soren's quieter answer, and then the footsteps retreating again. "What was that?" she said softly through the wood. A pause. "A rider was seen on the north road at dusk," Soren said, "wearing your king's colors, moving fast." Maren closed her eyes. So it had already begun. Word of the day was already traveling, and somewhere out in the dark, a recall order was riding toward her in a hand she knew as well as her own. "That is faster than even I expected," she said. "Drake has friends who carry news quickly when it suits him," Soren said. "I think he wants your king angry before your king has time to think." It was deep into the silence, much later, when she finally pressed her palm flat against the wood. "Are you sitting on the floor?" she said. A pause. "Yes." "The newly marked alpha of this entire territory," she said, "is sitting on a cold stone floor outside a guest room the night after his own ceremony." "The newly marked alpha," he answered, "is sitting exactly where he wants to be sitting, for the first time in longer than he can remember." She closed her eyes. Her throat tightened. On the other side of the door, Soren sat with his shoulders against the wall and his long legs stretched across the corridor and his own palm resting flat on the wood, in the same place hers was, with 2 inches of old oak between them and nothing else. He had spent the whole of his life learning to be perfectly still on the outside while everything churned within. It was the very first thing they taught a future leader, before letters, before history, before the long lists of borders and grievances. Let nothing show. Let no one read the cost of anything in your face, because a face that can be read is a door that can be opened by someone who means you harm. And here he was, undone by a closed door and the sound of a woman breathing on the other side of it. He thought he ought to mind that more than he did. "Tell me something," he said into the quiet. "Not as an envoy, not as anyone's careful instrument. Just tell me one true thing about yourself." For a long moment she did not answer. The fire ticked. The cold pressed at the window. Then, so softly that he had to still his own breath to catch it, "They have a word for me back home," she said. "The men who decide where I am sent. They believe it is a compliment. They give it the way another man might give a medal." "What is the word?" "Useful." The fire cracked. They mean it kindly, I think," she went on. "It is meant to be the highest thing a woman in my work can be. Composed, reliable, cold where it counts. A blade that stays sharp and never dulls, and never once asks anything of the hand that holds it." Her palm pressed a little harder against the wood. "My king told me, the night before I rode here, that my value to his court is my detachment, that I must not waste it on sentiment." A breath. "He said it the way a man tells a horse to mind the road, not cruelly, just certain, as though it were the only thing about me worth saying aloud, as though there were nothing else underneath it worth the trouble of naming." On the other side of the door, Soren's hand curled slowly into a fist against the wood, then opened again. "How old were you?" he asked. "The first time someone called you useful and meant it as the whole of you, as if there were nothing left over once the usefulness was counted." The question landed somewhere she had built careful walls around long ago. "Young," she said. "Younger than a child should be, to learn a thing like that." She thought of a smaller version of herself, a girl learning to sit very straight and want very little, learning that the surest way to be kept close, to be kept at all, was to need nothing and to feel nothing that showed, and to make herself into a clean, quiet instrument that never wept and never reached for anything and never, under any circumstance, fainted in front of 400 people. "There is a sister," she said, before she could decide not to say it. "Younger than me. Her name is Wren." "Tell me about her." "My position keeps her safe," Marin said. "Keeps her fed. Keeps her standing in a court that has very little patience for families who slip out of favor. As long as I am useful, she is protected by it. She lives in the shelter my usefulness casts." Her voice thinned. "If I am recalled in disgrace, if my king decides I have betrayed my post by being found in a new alpha's arms in front of his entire court, that shelter goes with me. And she is the one who stands in the cold for it. Not me. Her." The silence on the other side of the door changed. It grew heavier, closer. "That is why you ran for the carriage," Soren said quietly. "That is why I ran for the carriage." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something rough at the edges. "I have worn this mark for less than a single day," he said, "and already I understand the exact shape of what you are describing. The way the people around you decide what you are for, and then hand you that one use, and expect you to be grateful for the weight of it, as though you should thank them for the smallness of the room they have built around you." A pause. "They have been deciding what I am for since before I could walk. A leader, a border held, a line that does not break, a wall the territory can lean its back against and sleep behind." His voice softened. "And a daughter of the right family placed at my side at the right moment to seal the right alliance, whether or not either of us has ever exchanged a true word." "Sabine Greyridge, Sabine Greyridge," he agreed. "A kind young woman, by every account I have heard. She deserves better than to spend her life as a clause in someone else's contract." "As do I." His voice gentled further. "As do you." Marin pressed her forehead to the door. On the other side, she heard a soft thud, his forehead, resting against the same place. The 2 inches of old oak between them, suddenly the only thing in the whole wide world. "Soren," she said. His name left her mouth, and the swell surged, and she felt his answer through the wood. Not heard. Felt. A shift in the bond, like a sharp, indrawn breath. The sensation of a man who had braced his whole body for a blow and felt something gentle land against him instead. "Marin, my king's recall will reach me within days," she whispered. "Drake has seen to it that it comes fast and comes angry. And when it does, if I am still here, I lose everything I have built. My standing, my credibility, the one thing that has ever made me worth protecting." Her breath caught, and Wren loses the only shelter she has. "I know, and if I stay," she went on, the words coming faster now, spilling past the careful gates she had kept on them for 10 years. "Your council watches an enemy envoy settle into the new Alpha's private rooms. Drake's lie becomes the truth that everyone already half believes, and the peace I bled 2 seasons to build dies in a single winter, and the next war is fought by people who never even heard my name. You asked me to be honest. That is the honest shape of it. There is no version of this where staying costs nothing, and I am not certain I have the right to spend what it costs. The fire had burned low. The room had gone dim and gold and close. For a long while, he did not answer at all. When he finally did, his voice was very quiet and very steady, and it went through her like warmth moving slowly through cold water. "I am not asking you to give up anything," he said. "I keep saying it wrong, and you keep hearing it the way the men back home trained you to hear it, as a claim, as a hand reaching for the blade to use it." A pause. "I am not reaching for the blade. I am asking to stand beside you while you decide what is worth keeping and what is not. That is all. Not to choose for you. Not to spend your sister's safety to feed my own wanting. Just to be in the room while you choose." His palm pressed flat against the door. "For your whole life you have stood in rooms full of people who only ever wanted you to choose what was useful to them. Let there be one room, just one, with one person in it, who wants you to choose what is true. Even if what is true sends you north in that carriage at first light. Even then." Marin's composure broke, not in the way she had spent her life dreading it would, not with sobs, not with collapse, not with the messy, shameful unraveling she had trained herself to fear above almost everything else. It broke the way ice breaks on a river in the first warm days of the turning season. Slowly, quietly. A long, low cracking sound that travels for miles, and beneath it, something moving again that had been frozen so long she had honestly forgotten it had ever been able to move at all. She did not open the door, not yet, but she turned and she settled her shoulder against it, and she stayed. And on the other side, separated from her by 2 inches of old oak, by 10 years of practiced stillness, by one impossible day, Soren stayed too. He did not press. He did not ask again. He simply stayed the way he had promised he would. The fire burned down to a bed of soft red embers. Somewhere far off, in the dark heart of the palace, a faction was sharpening its story for the morning. A rider in familiar colors was eating up the north road by torchlight, carrying a recall order written in a hand she would know anywhere. And in some quiet wing, a young woman of the wrong pack was being told, even now, that the alliance she had been promised might yet be saved. If only the foreign envoy could be made to disappear before she did any more harm. The threat was real. It was already in motion. None of it had gone away simply because the corridor had gone quiet. But for this one night, in this one narrow hall, none of it could reach through the door. There was only the warmth of the bond, humming low and steady between 2 people who had each spent the whole of their lives being told precisely what they were for, and who were learning slowly in the dark, on opposite sides of a locked door, that they might be allowed, at last, to be something more than useful. For a long time, Marin did not move. She sat with her shoulder against the door and listened to him breathe on the other side of it, and she felt the warmth in her chest rise and steady and rise again, like a tide that had finally found the shore it had been searching for. The fire was almost out. The cold had crept in along the floor, and somewhere in the slow hours before dawn, Without quite deciding to, she reached up and turned the latch. The door opened inward, soft on its hinges. He was sitting exactly where she had pictured him, his back against the far wall, his long legs stretched across the corridor. The heavy ceremonial clothing was gone, traded at some point for a simple dark shirt, open at the collar, and plain trousers. The mark of the alpha he could not take off, but everything else that had made him a spectacle had been set aside. His dark hair had fallen out of its careful order, loosened by hours of leaning against cold stone. A tray of food sat untouched on the floor beside him, brought by some well-meaning attendant who had clearly given up trying to talk a new alpha into eating somewhere more dignified than a hallway. He looked up at her, and his eyes were raw, in a way that made her chest ache. Not hopeful, not expectant, just open. As if he had been sitting there the whole night, prepared for either ending, her opening the door, or her voice through the wood telling him to go, and had decided that whichever one came, he would meet it without flinching, and without making her carry the weight of his disappointment. He did not stand. He did not reach for her. He simply looked at her, and the bond between them hummed so loudly in the silence that she half expected the old stone walls to shiver with it. So she crossed the threshold, and she sat down beside him on the cold floor. Their shoulders touched. The swell crested, and then settled into something steady. A rhythm. A tide that had finally come home. "You did not sleep," she said. "No. You did not eat." "No." The corner of his mouth moved. It seemed wrong, somehow, to be comfortable on the other side of a door you were sitting against. Maren turned her head and looked at him properly. This close, in the dying firelight that reached them faintly through the open door, she could see the cost of the night written all across him, the shadows beneath his eyes, the stubble along his jaw, the way his shoulders, even now, were not quite at rest. He had held still for 3 hours in the great hall. He had held still all night in a stone corridor. He was, she was beginning to understand, a man who knew how to stay. "Soren," she said softly. "I am going to send a letter to my king. In the morning." Something flickered in his eyes. He kept it carefully level. "Telling him what?" "That the situation here requires extended observation." A beat. "Extended observation," he repeated, "at the very least, several more days." She watched his face. "Possibly considerably longer. These things are difficult to predict. A good envoy does not rush her assessment." The corner of his mouth curved, slow and disbelieving and warm. "That is the most transparent thing I have ever heard a diplomat say." "I am an excellent diplomat," she said. "I will make it sound very dry." And then she was not entirely sure who moved first. His hand found hers on the cold stone floor. His fingers laced through hers, warm and careful and deliberate, the way a man does a thing he has wanted for a long time and refuses to fumble now that it is finally his to do. He lifted her hand. He pressed his lips to her knuckles, and the swell rose, warm and deep and certain, as if her whole body had been waiting all her life to be touched by exactly this hand and no other. She turned toward him. Her free hand came up to rest against the line of his jaw, and the heat of his skin beneath her fingertips sent a shiver through the bond that she felt all the way down into her teeth. He went very still under her touch, the way a man goes still when he does not trust himself to move slowly enough. "You are about to cause a diplomatic incident," she whispered. His eyes lifted to hers, dark green, gone darker in the low light. "Gladly," he said, and then he kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, not the way she had braced herself for, half certain he would treat her like something breakable. He kissed her the way a man kisses when he has been holding perfectly still for hours, for an entire night, for the whole of one impossible day, and has finally been given leave to move. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers threading into the loosened weave of her braid. His mouth was warm and firm and sure against hers, and he tasted of cedar smoke and the cold night air and something sweeter underneath both, something the bond seemed to recognize before her mind could name it, something that felt impossibly like coming home to a house she had never once lived in. Maren kissed him back. She had spent 10 years keeping her hands folded in her lap, keeping her voice level and her face unreadable, and every want she had ever owned locked away somewhere small and dark where no one could use it against her. And now, on the cold floor of a foreign palace, in last night's rumpled clothing, with tomorrow's consequences already riding toward her on the North Road, she let herself want something out loud. Her fingers curled into the front of his shirt. His arm came around her, drawing her closer, careful even now, even here, of the strength he carried. The warmth of him surrounded her, the scent of him, cedar and iron and rain on warm stone. And the bond sang so loud and so bright that the cold corridor and the dying fire and the whole watching palace simply fell away. There was only this, his mouth, his hand at the back of her neck, the steady, enormous certainty of the thing rising between them. When they finally broke apart, she did not go far. Her forehead rested against his. Their breath mingled in the narrow space between them, both of them unsteady, both of them undone. "You held me for 3 hours," she said, very quietly. "Yes, in front of your whole court, on the most important day you will ever have. Yes. Why?" He pulled back just enough to look at her. And whatever had been raw and braced in his eyes through the long night had given way now to something steadier, something that had decided, "Because the moment I caught you," he said, "I understood that setting you down was the one thing I was not willing to do. Not for the ceremony, not for the council, not for the alliance every elder in that hall had spent a year arranging for me. I would have sat there until the candles burned out and the roof came down before I let anyone take you out of my arms." His thumb traced the line of her cheek. "They have spent my whole life telling me what a leader cannot want," he said. "And I sat in that hall, holding you, and I thought, let them be wrong about this one thing. Let me want this one thing all the way down to the floor of myself, and refuse to apologize for it." Maren's eyes burned. For her entire life, she had been wanted for what she could do. No one had ever simply refused to put her down. She kissed him again, softer this time, slower, and he met her there, unhurried, as though they had every hour in the world, as though the rider on the North Road did not exist. As though the council was not already stirring. As though there were nothing in all the territory but this narrow hall and the warmth between two people who had each spent their whole lives being told exactly what they were for. For that one stretch of the deepest dark before the windows began to gray. There wasn't. There was only warmth and breath and the slow, certain settling of a bond that had finally been allowed to complete the circuit it had been straining toward since the first moment their eyes met. She did not go back into the room alone. And he did not go back to being a man who held still. The first gray light was thinning the dark at the windows when it all came apart. Maren felt it before she heard it. A change in the bond, not the warm rise of him near her, but something colder threading through it, like a draft slipping under a door, a wrongness, a tightening. Then came the knock, sharp, urgent, not Alder's measured hand. Soren was on his feet between one breath and the next, the night's softness gone from him, the alpha settling back over his shoulders like a second skin. "Enter," he said. Alder stepped in, and his careful steward's blankness had cracked. His face was grave. "Your Grace, the council has been called, not by you." Soren's jaw tightened. "By Drake. By Elder Drake," Alder confirmed. "Before dawn. He has gathered enough of the elders to make it lawful, and he has not come empty-handed." His gaze flicked briefly to Maren, and there was something almost like apology in it. "A rider reached the gates an hour ago. Your king's colors, envoy. The order is sealed, and it is addressed to you, and Drake has somehow already learned its contents." The cold in the bond deepened. Maren rose slowly, smoothing her rumpled tunic with hands that had gone steady again out of pure long habit, the way they always did the instant a room turned dangerous. "What does Drake intend?" she said. "He means to put it to the council this morning," Alder said. "All of it. He will read your king's recall aloud. He will call you a planted agent of a rival territory. He will say the new Alpha has been compromised on the first night of his rule by an enemy who fell at his feet on purpose." Alder drew a slow breath. "And then he will offer the council a remedy. The Lady Sabine. A binding to Grey Ridge, announced today, before the rumor can spread any further. He will frame it as the only way to prove the new Alpha is still his own man. He will make refusing it look like proof of the very thing he is accusing you of." The room went very quiet. Soren stood with his back to the cold hearth, and Maren watched the trap close around him with the clear, awful clarity she had spent her whole career learning to see. It was a good trap. She could admire it, in the distant way one admires a well-built thing meant to do harm. Drake had taken the bond, the most private thing either of them owned, and turned it into a public weapon. He had taken her king's anger and made it his own evidence. He had given the council a frightening problem and, in the same breath, a comforting solution, and tied that solution to the alliance he had wanted all along. If Soren bound himself to Sabine Greyridge, Drake won. He got his alliance, his influence, his hand on the new Alpha's reins from the very first day. If Soren refused, Drake simply pointed at the refusal as proof that the enemy envoy still had her hooks in him. Either way, the bond between them became the thing that destroyed everything. And under it all, threaded through the whole design, was the recall order with her name on it. The one that would strip her of her standing, the one that would pull the shelter out from over Wren's head. Maren felt the bond pull taut between herself and Soren, and for the first time it was not warm. It ached, a low, physical pull, deep behind her ribs, as if her own body had understood, before her mind would let it, that the thing it had just been allowed to complete was now being threatened with a clean and brutal severing. She saw Soren feel it too, saw the faint flinch cross his face, quickly mastered. The bond did not like the word severing. It recoiled from it the way a hand recoils from flame. "How long?" Soren said. "Until the council convenes." "Mid-morning," Alder said. He timed it so there would be no chance to gather your own allies before then. The ones who would stand with you are scattered. He knows it. Of course he does. Soren's voice was flat, cold, controlled in a way Maren recognized, because it was the same control she wore. The kind a person learns when showing the truth is dangerous. Alder hesitated. "Your Grace, there is one more thing. Elder Drake sent word that he is willing to be generous if the envoy departs quietly, now, before the council sits. He says the recall gives her every reason to go, and that if she is simply gone, by mid-morning he is prepared to let the matter rest, to call it an unfortunate fainting and nothing more, to let the peace stand." The words landed in the room like stones into still water. Maren understood them instantly. It was the cleanest version, the kindest even, in its cruel way. If she left now, the peace she had bled for would survive. Soren would not be forced into a binding he did not want, because there would be nothing left to force him toward. Drake would have no enemy to point at. Her king's recall would simply be obeyed, and her standing might even be salvaged, and Wren would keep her shelter. All of it could be saved. All she had to do was get into the carriage she had so nearly gotten into the night before, and leave the one person who had ever refused to put her down. The bond throbbed, low and deep and grieving, as if it already knew. Soren turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had met him, he did not look certain. He looked like a man watching the ground open between himself and the only thing he had ever recognized. "Maren," he said, just her name. Nothing else. He would not ask. He had promised her he would not ask. She looked back at him, this man who had held perfectly still for 3 hours rather than let her go, and she understood, with a cold clarity that hurt worse than anything had hurt in years, that the choice in front of her was not between duty and wanting. It was crueler than that. She could stay and watch everything she had built, everything she had protected, everything Wren depended on, burn to feed her own first taste of being loved. Or she could leave and protect every other person in the world she was responsible for, by giving up the only person who had ever loved the part of her that was not useful at all. The gray light spread across the floor. Somewhere down the cold halls of the palace, the council was beginning to gather, and the bond, newly whole, newly singing, pulled so hard against the threat of breaking that Maren had to press her hand flat against her own chest, the way she had in the great hall on the day all of this began, as if she could hold the thing inside her body by force, as if wanting it badly enough could be the same as being allowed to keep it. In the end, she chose to leave. It was the right choice. That was the cruelest part of it. Not a coward's choice, not a selfish one. The right one. If she left before the council sat, the peace held. Soren walked free of a binding he did not want. Drake lost the enemy he needed to point at. Her king's recall was simply obeyed, and her standing might survive. And the shelter over Ren's head would stay exactly where it was. Every person she was responsible for would be safe. All it would cost was her. And she had spent her whole life learning that this was an acceptable trade. So she stood in the gray morning light and said the words, "I am going to go." Soren did not answer right away. He stood by the cold hearth with the dawn climbing the walls behind him, and she watched him receive it the way a man receives a blow he has been bracing for. Not flinching, just absorbing it, letting it land somewhere deep and quiet, where it would do its damage out of sight. "Before the council," he said, "before the council, within the hour if Linnea can have the carriage ready." Her voice was level, diplomatic, controlled, the voice that had never once failed her in a difficult room. "It is the only path that saves everything. You know it is. You saw it the same moment I did." "I saw it," he said quietly. "Then you know I have to take it." He was silent for a long moment, and then he did the thing she had not expected, the thing that nearly undid the careful work she had done all morning to make her heart go still. He nodded. "All right," he said. Just that. Not a plea. Not a wall of reasons. Not the weight of his rank thrown across the doorway to keep her in. He simply let the door stand open. "You promised you would not ask me to stay," Maren said. Her voice was not quite as steady now. "I did. You are keeping it. I am keeping it." His jaw worked once. "The bond is screaming at me to chain the door shut, to call the guard, to do every selfish, frightened thing my body is begging me to do." He drew a slow breath. "And I am not going to do any of them, because the moment I make you stay, I become exactly what they all said I was. A man who saw something he wanted and reached for the blade to keep it." He met her eyes. "I told you what you are. I told you the word I kept hearing. Mine." A muscle moved in his throat. "I meant it the way the sun belongs to the morning, not the way a man owns a horse, and a thing that is yours the way the sun is the morning's. You do not lock in a room. You let it rise, or you have not understood the first thing about it." The bond throbbed, low and grieving, between them. "So go," he said, and the word cost him more than anything he had said all night. "If leaving is what protects the people you carry, then go and carry them. And let me be the one room in your life that did not try to make you smaller, to keep you." Maren turned away, because if she looked at him one heartbeat longer, she was not going to be able to do the right thing at all. Linnea was waiting in the corridor. She took one look at Maren's face and did not say a single word. She simply fell into step, the way she had for years, and went to ready the things that needed readying. The preparation was a mercy in its way. There was an order to it that Marin could lean on, folding, smoothing, setting each item where it belonged. The quiet, familiar work of a woman who had packed to leave 100 difficult places and had always been able to walk out of them with her composure intact. Her hands knew the work. They did it without her, which left her mind free to circle the one thought she did not want to look at directly. She was doing it again. She stopped, a folded tunic half pressed between her palms, and let herself see it. She was doing the exact thing she had always done, making herself small, making herself absent, sacrificing the one thing she wanted in order to be useful to everyone else, and calling it duty, and calling it the right choice, because the right choice had always been the one where she disappeared and everyone else was kept safe. It was the same trade she had made as a child: want nothing, need nothing, take up no space they could resent, be the clean, quiet, useful thing, and in exchange you get to stay. Except now she was not staying. Now the price of being useful was leaving the one place she had ever been wanted whole. And some small voice, very far down, in a part of her she had kept locked for 10 years, asked a question she had never once let herself ask. What if there is another way? Marin set the tunic down. She made herself stand still in the middle of the room, and she did the thing they had trained her to do, the thing she was better at than almost anyone alive. She looked at the problem, not as a woman in love with a man she could not have, as an envoy, as the sharpest negotiator in 2 territories, as the person who had stitched a piece out of nothing across 2 long seasons, line by patient line. She looked at Drake's trap, and she stopped feeling it, and she started reading it. It was good work. She had granted that much already. But good work was not the same as flawless work, and the longer she looked, the more she saw the place where the seams did not quite meet. Drake's whole design rested on a single hidden assumption. It assumed she would not be in the room, every piece of it. The recall read aloud in her absence. The accusation made about a woman who was not there to answer it. The frightening story told to frightened elders with no one present to tell it differently. The clean solution offered before anyone could think to question whether the problem was even real. The trap was built for an empty chair. Drake had even offered to let her go quietly, had practically begged her to vanish before mid-morning, and she had taken that, in her grief, as mercy. It was not mercy. It was the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. He needed her gone. Not because her leaving solved the problem, because her leaving was the only thing that let his version of the story stand unchallenged. A planted agent does not stay to defend herself. A planted agent flees the moment she is named. Her empty chair would prove every word he intended to speak, but a chair that was not empty. A foreign envoy who walked into that council of her own free will, calm and unhurried, and asked for leave to speak. That was a thing his trap had no shape to hold. Marin felt the cold clarity move through her like a tide turning. She had spent her whole life being told her value was her usefulness, her detachment, her gift for being sent away. But that gift had never been the detachment. It had been this, the thing she was doing right now. The reading of a room. The finding of the one loose thread. The patient unpicking of a thing other people thought was finished. Her king had only ever wanted the cold part of it, the part that let him point her at a problem and not worry about her heart. He had never once understood that the cold was not the talent, The cold was just the cage she kept the talent in. "Linnea," she said. Her companion looked up from the half-packed trunk. "Stop packing," Marin said. Linnea straightened slowly. Something in her old friend's face shifted, a careful hope she did not quite dare to show yet. "Cat, the carriage is nearly ready. If we are going, we have to go before they sit." "We are not going." "Marin." "I have spent 10 years," Marin said, "leaving rooms to keep other people safe, making myself small enough to fit through the gap they left for me. And it has worked. Ren is safe because of it. The peace exists because of it." Her voice steadied, found its center. "But Drake built that whole trap on the certainty that I would do it one more time, that I would disappear, the way useful women are supposed to disappear, the moment it became inconvenient to be seen." She picked up the recall order from where it lay sealed and waiting, and she did not open it. "He is counting on the cage," she said. "He is counting on me being exactly what I have always been told I am." Linnea was very still. "And you mean to be something else?" "I mean to be in the room." The seed was planted now. She could feel the whole shape of it beginning to grow. She did not yet have every word she would need, but she could see the loose thread, and she knew, with the deep certainty of a woman who had done this work her whole life, that if she could only get herself into that chair and earn 1 minute of the council's ear, she could pull it. Drake had made one mistake. He had built a trap to remove a useful woman from a room. He had not built one to survive her choosing to stay in it. She found Soren in the corridor outside, where he had not moved from the doorway. He had not gone to gather allies. He had not gone to prepare a defense. He had simply stood there, keeping his word, waiting to watch her leave. He looked up when she came out, embraced. "The carriage is ready," he said. The words came out rough. "Send it back to the stables." He went very still. "Marin, I am not leaving." She stopped close to him, close enough to feel the warmth of him through the cold morning air, close enough to feel the bond surge up grateful and bright between them. "And before you say anything, understand that this is not the bond talking, and it is not you. You did the one thing no one has ever done for me. You let the door stand open. You were ready to let me walk through it." Her voice caught, then held. That is the only reason I am able to choose to stay, because for the first time, it is actually a choice." Soren searched her face. "The council still sits at mid-morning. Drake still holds the floor. Your king's recall is still real, and your name is still on it. None of that has changed." "No," she agreed. "But I have." She told him then, quickly, cleanly, the way she would brief a king. The flaw in the trap, the empty chair it was built around, the single thing Drake had never planned for, because in his whole life he had never once met a useful woman who refused to vanish on command. She watched her own certainty take root in him as she spoke, watched the grief in his face give way, by degrees, to something fierce and quiet and proud. "You are going to walk into a hostile council," he said slowly, "full of men who have already half decided you are an enemy, holding a recall order with your own name on it, and you are going to talk them out of a war." "I am going to talk them out of a story," Marin said. "The war comes after the story. You stop the story. You stop the war. A long breath went out of him. What do you need from me? And there it was. Not what do I need to do to protect you. Not stand back and let me handle this. What do you need from me? A man asking to stand beside her, exactly as he had said he would. I need you to do the hardest thing, she said. When I stand up in that council, I need you to let me speak. Not for me, not before me, not over me. You are the alpha. The room will want to look to you. The moment you step in front of me to defend me, Drake wins, because then it is the bond protecting its prize, and that is the very story he is selling. She held his eyes. I have to win it myself, with my own voice, or it is not won at all. For a man who had carried her 3 hours rather than let her go, she understood what she was asking. To stand still. Again. To watch the person he had refused to set down walk alone into the most dangerous room in the territory, and to keep his hands at his sides while she did it. It was the cruelest thing she could have asked of him. It was also the only thing that would actually save them. Soren looked at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he said again, the same words he had given her when he thought she was leaving forever. Only now they meant something entirely different. I will stand beside you, he said, and I will let you speak, and the whole council will watch me do it, and not understand until you make them understand that this is not a man defending his prize. His hand found hers, brief, certain. It is an alpha learning in front of everyone that the strongest thing he can do is trust her to win it herself. Outside, the carriage rolled back toward the stables, empty, and down the cold stone halls, in a chamber filling slowly with grim-faced elders, Cassian Drake took his place, certain of the empty chair he had built his whole morning around. Maren straightened her crimson tunic. She did not braid her hair back, the way she always had before a difficult room. She left it loose, and she went to take the chair he was so sure would be empty. The council chamber was already full when she stepped into it. It was a hard room, stone and shadow, a long table of dark wood, the elders seated along both sides in their heavy robes. High windows let in the thin gray light of full morning, and it fell cold across all those grim, watching faces. At the head of the table stood Cassian Drake. He had the floor. He had timed it perfectly, the way he timed everything. And he had, she saw at once, already begun. A sealed letter lay open before him. Her king's colors. The recall. Drake was mid-sentence when the doors opened and his words died in his throat as every head in the room turned toward the one thing he had built his entire morning on the certainty he would not see. A foreign envoy. Calm, unhurried, walking in of her own free will. Her hair was loose, her tunic was crimson, her hands were not folded and they were not trembling. And she did not wait at the threshold to be summoned. She walked the length of that cold room, past the rows of elders, past Drake himself, and she took the empty chair set out for the visiting delegation, and she sat down in it as though it had been waiting for her all along. The silence was enormous. Soren entered a step behind her. He did not move to the head of the table, to the place that was his by right. He did not stand between her and the room. He took the seat beside her, exactly beside her, neither before nor above, and he folded his hands on the dark wood and said nothing at all. It cost him. She could feel it through the bond, the strain of it, the deep animal pull to rise and shield her. He held still anyway. He had promised. Drake recovered first. He was too practiced not to. "Envoy Cole," he said, and his voice was smooth, almost warm, the voice of a man covering a stumble. "This is unexpected. There was no need for you to trouble yourself. The council can resolve this matter on your behalf. You should be resting after such a difficult day." It was beautifully done. In a single breath, he had made her sound fragile, made her presence sound like an imposition, and offered kindly to speak for her. Maren let the silence stretch one beat past comfortable. Then she said, "I would ask the council's leave to speak." "That is hardly necessary," Drake began. "It is entirely necessary." She did not raise her voice. She had never needed to. "A grave accusation is being made in this room. By the look of that open letter, it is being made against me. And in every council, in every territory, worth its salt, the accused is permitted to answer before judgment is passed." She turned her head, unhurried, to the eldest of the seated elders, a stooped woman with iron-gray hair at the far end of the table. "Unless the customs of this hall are different from every other, in which case I will gladly be corrected." A long pause. The old woman inclined her head slowly. "The customs are not different. She may speak." Drake's jaw tightened, just slightly. The first thread had pulled. Maren rose. Under the table, for the length of a single breath, her hand was not as steady as her voice. The cost of standing alone in a room full of men who wanted her gone was real, and her body knew it even when her face did not. She pressed her palm flat against her thigh, where no one could see, and let the small tremor pass through her and out. Then she lifted her chin, and she stepped forward, and she let them look at her. She had spent 10 years learning that the most powerful thing in a hostile room was often the willingness to simply stand in it, unafraid, and let the silence do its work. "Elder Drake has told you a story this morning," she said. "Allow me to tell you what it is, because it is a very good story, and good stories are the most dangerous things in any room." She began to walk, slowly, along the length of the table. "The story goes like this. A foreign envoy did not faint by accident yesterday. She fainted on purpose. She was sent here, planted here, to put a hook into your new alpha on the first day of his rule, and reel your whole territory toward her king's hand. And the proof of it, Elder Drake will tell you, is that her own king has now recalled her in fury." She gestured lightly toward the open letter. "There it is, sealed, real. Read it aloud if you like. I have read it already." A murmur moved through the elders. She had taken his evidence and held it up herself before he could. "It is a frightening story," Maren went on. "And Elder Drake, being a careful man, did not leave you frightened without offering a cure. A binding to the Grey Ridge family. Announced today before the rumor can spread." Proof to all the territories that your alpha is still his own man. She paused. Have I told it fairly, Elder Drake? Drake's face had gone carefully neutral. You have told it accurately. Good, Marin said. Then let me show you the one thread it hangs from. She stopped walking. A planted agent, she said, flees the moment she is named. That is the whole nature of the thing. You cannot plant a spy who stays to be questioned, because a spy who stays can be unmade in an afternoon. She let her gaze travel down the table. Elder Drake knew that. So this morning, before any of you arrived, he sent me a private offer. Leave quietly, now, before the council sits, and he would let the whole matter rest. He would call it an unfortunate fainting and nothing more. She watched the words land. Ask yourselves why, she said. If I am truly an enemy agent, why would the man who just named me one offer, in the same breath, to let me slip away clean? Why beg me to vanish before I could be examined? Silence. Because my leaving was never the solution to his problem, Marin said. My leaving was the proof of his story. An empty chair cannot argue. An absent woman cannot be questioned. He needed me gone, so that the only voice left in this room telling you what happened would be his. She turned and looked directly at Drake for the first time. You built a very fine trap, Elder. I will grant you that freely. But you built it for an empty chair. She spread her hands. And here I am, sitting in it. Along the table, the elders had gone very still. The iron-haired old woman at the end was watching Marin now with a sharp, considering look that had not been there before. Drake stepped smoothly into the gap. A clever speech, he said. But cleverness is precisely what one would expect from a trained agent. It proves nothing. The recall is real. The Alpha did leave his own ceremony for her. These are facts, not stories. They are facts, Marin agreed. Let us look at one more. And here she turned the blade. The Greyridge family, she said, was seated at the high table yesterday, at the place of honor beside the new Alpha. The Lady Sabine was placed there, in full view of this entire territory. Before I ever set foot in that hall, before I fainted, before any of this began, she let it sink in. The cure, Elder Drake, was arranged before the sickness. The binding you are offering this council as an urgent remedy to a crisis is the exact thing you spent the last year arranging, long before there was any crisis at all. A different kind of murmur went through the room now. Lower, sharper. For one breath she felt Soren beside her, the strain of him pouring down the bond, the whole weight of a man fighting the instinct to rise. She did not turn to him. She did not dare, but she let one slow beat pass, and felt him steady, felt him choose the harder thing again, and the certainty of it ran into her like a hand pressed flat to her back. He was not going to stand up. He was going to trust her. And that trust, more than anything Drake could say, was what let her find the next words. You did not build this morning to protect your Alpha, Marin said. You built it to deliver an alliance you had already promised yourself. My fainting did not create your plan. It rescued it. It gave you a frightening reason to demand today what you could not otherwise have demanded for years. And if I had not collapsed at all, you would have found some other pretext, because the binding was always the point, and the new alpha's own wishes were never part of your design. She looked then down the table to where a young woman sat among the Greyridge party. Sabine Greyridge, pale, rigid. A woman, Marin saw, who had spent the whole morning being spoken about as though she were a clause in a contract, with no more say in her own life than a line of ink. I do not say this to shame the Lady Sabine, Marin said, and she softened her voice. She has been used in this as carelessly as anyone, placed at a table, offered as a remedy, spoken of as a solution to a problem she did not make and was never asked about. She held the young woman's eyes. She deserved better than to be a tool in another man's plan. So did I. So, I think, does your alpha. For a long moment, no one breathed, and then Sabine Greyridge stood. Her voice shook, but she did not sit back down. The envoy speaks the truth, she said. I was told this morning that the binding might still be saved, if she could be made to disappear. No one asked me whether I wished to be bound to a man who has never once looked at me the way he looked at her. She lifted her chin. I do not. I will not be a remedy for a sickness that does not exist. She sat. The Greyridge elders beside her had gone the color of ash. Drake's careful composure had begun, at last, to crack. This is sentiment, he said, and there was an edge in it now. The first true heat he had shown. Sentiment dressed as argument. The recall remains. Her own king has cast her out. Whatever pretty case she makes, the fact stands that her presence here has provoked a foreign king to anger, and that anger threatens the very peace she claims to defend. It was his last good card, and he played it hard. Marin had been waiting for it. Yes, she said, let us speak about my king's anger, because that, Elder Drake, is the one part of your story that is real. He is angry. The letter is real. I would never insult this council by pretending otherwise. She walked back toward her chair, slow and certain. But ask yourselves what he is angry about. Not the bond. He does not know about the bond. He knows what reached him on the North Road, carried fast by riders who serve, I would guess, men who share Elder Drake's interests. She did not look at Drake. She did not need to. He knows that his envoy was seen in a new alpha's arms and drew her own conclusions. He is angry because he believes his neutrality has been spent without his leave, and he believes it because someone made very certain he would believe it before he had time to think. She reached her chair, and she rested one hand on its back, and she faced the full length of the table. So let me give him, and you, the truth that anger was built to drown out. Her voice did not rise. It deepened. I was sent here to renew a peace, to keep two territories from spending another generation's sons on a border neither side can hold. That is my work. It is the work I have given 10 years of my life to. And I am, the council should know, very good at it. A faint, dry note. My own king calls it my finest quality, though he names it coldness. He is wrong about the name, but he is not wrong about the skill. She looked from face to face. Here is what coldness would do. Coldness would obey the recall, ride north, Let this council bind your alpha to a frightened young woman to soothe the panic that one ambitious elder manufactured this morning, and let the real peace die in the confusion. Coldness would be useful and silent and gone by mid-morning, exactly as Elder Drake requested. A pause. I am done being useful in that way. The words rang in the stone room. What I offer instead is not a fainting envoy, and not a secret bond, and not a captured alpha. It is a treaty. She lifted her chin. An open one. Written in daylight. Sealed before this council. Sent north to my king not as an apology, but as the single most favorable alliance his court has been offered in a generation. A permanent tie between two territories, with a named envoy to hold it, transparent in every line, with nothing hidden and nothing to whisper about. The very opposite of the thing Elder Drake accuses me of. She let the shape of it settle over the room. A planted agent hides her king's hand. I am proposing to put both hands flat on this table in front of all of you. A captured alpha is bound in secret. I am proposing that whatever stands between your alpha and me be entered into the open record and judged lawfully by this council, today, in the light, with the Lady Sabine free, and the Grey Ridge family honored, and no war fought over a story that was never true. Across the table, Soren rose. He had stayed seated through all of it. He had held still, as he had promised, while she walked alone through the most dangerous room in the territory, and pulled the loose thread free with her bare hands. Now he stood, and the whole council turned to him, expecting, at last, the Alpha to take command, to speak over her, to close the matter with his rank. He did not. The envoy has spoken the truth, Soren said. All of it. There is a bond between us. I will not hide it from this council, because hiding it is the only thing that could ever make it dangerous. He looked down the table, level and unflinching. I left my ceremony because I would not set her down. That is true. Elder Drake will tell you a leader should be ashamed of such a thing. I am not. But I did not come here today to defend her. She has not needed defending. Any of you who watched the last hour knows that. He turned then and looked at Marin, and the whole room watched him do it. I came to learn, in front of all of you, he said, that the strongest thing an alpha can do is not stand in front of the one he has chosen. It is to stand beside her and trust her to win the room herself. He sat back down, beside her, not before her. The silence that followed was a different silence than the one she had walked into. The iron-haired old woman at the head of the table rose slowly to her feet. In all my long years in this hall, she said, I have watched a great many people argue for their own lives. I have rarely watched one do it by arguing for everyone else's. Her sharp eyes moved to Drake. Elder Drake, the Lady Sabine has spoken. The matter of the Grey Ridge binding is closed. It was closed, I think, before it was ever opened. Drake opened his mouth. You manufactured a crisis to force this council's hand, the old woman said, and you were unmasked by the very woman you tried to remove from the room before she could speak. I have seen ambition in this hall before. I have not often seen it so thoroughly undone in a single morning. Her voice hardened. Sit down, Cassian. You have done enough. For a moment, Drake stood frozen. his whole careful design lying in pieces around him. Then he sat. The old woman turned back to Marin, and something in her weathered face had shifted into something close to respect. "Envoy Cole, this council will hear your treaty. In the open. In daylight, as you said." A dry, faint flicker crossed her mouth. "And when you write north to your king, I suspect you will not need our help persuading him. A man who recalled you for spending his neutrality may think twice when he reads what you have spent it on. The most favorable alliance in a generation has a way of cooling a king's temper." Marin inclined her head, and only she and the man seated beside her felt the bond surge up between them, warm and bright and whole, no longer a thing to be hidden or spent or grieved. A thing, at last, spoken out loud, in the light, in front of everyone, and allowed to stand. She had walked into that room a useful woman. She walked out of it something her king had never once let her be. Heard. The snow came down from the high passes before the answer did. That was the way of things so far north. The cold always arrived first. The words a person waited for came after, carried slow along roads that frost had made treacherous. But the words did come. The treaty went north, sealed in daylight, exactly as Marin had promised the council it would. Open in every line. Nothing buried, nothing whispered. The most favorable alliance her king's court had been offered in a generation, laid plainly before him, with both her hands flat on the page for anyone to see. And her king, who had recalled her in fury, read it. The reply that came back, when it finally came, did not mention the fury at all. It did not mention the arms she had been found in, or the ceremony she had caused a new alpha to abandon, or the rumor that had ridden the North Road faster than any honest horse should travel. Kings rarely admit they have been managed. Hers admitted nothing. He simply named her his permanent envoy to the territory. A standing post, the first of its kind between the two lands. A bridge that had never existed before, written into being with her name at the head of it. Marin read the letter twice, not because it was tender. It was not. It was a cold, exact document, the kind her king had always favored, every word weighed on a careful scale. She read it twice because of one line near the end. The line she suspected had cost him more than all the rest of it together. The crown has long valued the envoy's detachment. The crown now sees it may have undervalued her judgment. It was not an apology. He was not a man who made those. But after 10 years of being prized for the one quality that had always kept her smallest, it was the nearest thing to being truly seen that he had ever set down in ink. And the strange part, the part she sat with for a long while by the window as the snow came down and the fire ticked behind her, was that the words no longer arrived as the only light in a dark room. They arrived as a small, late grace. Welcome, but no longer needed to keep her warm. She had learned something, somewhere in the long weeks of writing that treaty by candlelight. She had learned that the approval of powerful men, the thing she had spent her whole life arranging herself around, was a fire she no longer had to stand so close to. She was warm on her own now. She had not known that about herself before this winter. She had not known it at all. Wren came north while the passes were still open. That was its own quiet victory, won in a place no one would think to look for one. The treaty had a clause in it, set among the dry trade terms where only the most careful reader would ever find it, that secured the standing of the envoy's household by law. Maren had written that clause herself, late one night, reading it back 3 times to be sure of every word. Her sister no longer lived in the shelter of Maren's usefulness. That shelter had always been a thin thing, a tent that could be folded and carried off the moment Maren stopped being convenient to a king. Wren lived now in the shelter of a thing written into stone, a thing that could not be pulled away to punish a feeling, or a fainting, or a daughter who had stopped being cold enough. The girl arrived wind-burned and bright-eyed, and she threw her arms around her sister in the snowy courtyard hard enough to knock the breath out of them both. And Maren held her there, in the falling snow, and felt something deep in her chest that she had spent her whole life holding fatally, carefully still. It moved. It was allowed to move now. She had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that it could. Of Cassian Drake, there is little left to tell. The council that had watched him undone in a single morning was not a forgiving body. Ambition they understood, even respected in its place. But a man who would manufacture a crisis to seize the reins of a new alpha on the first day of his rule, and who would try to bury a foreign envoy's voice before she could answer for her own life, was a man who had shown the whole hall exactly how far he would go. The elders stripped him quietly of the influence he had spent years gathering. There was no spectacle. He simply found, season by season, that fewer doors opened to him, that fewer ears bent his way, until the man who had nearly bound a territory to his own design sat at the far end of every table that would still have him. The Lady Sabine Greyridge, for her part, went home unbound and unbought. She stopped to speak with Maren before she rode out, on the morning the snow first softened. A short conversation, awkward at the edges, the way conversations are between 2 women who have stood on opposite sides of a thing neither of them chose. "You did not have to name me," Sabine said. "In the council, you could have let me sit there as the remedy. It would have been simpler for you." "You were not a remedy," Maren said. "You were a person being spent. I have spent enough of my own life being spent to recognize the look of it on someone else." Sabine was quiet a moment. Then she said, "When I stand up for myself someday, the way you did in that hall, I would like to do it half as well." And she rode north into the thinning cold, free, which was, Maren thought, watching her go, a better ending than any binding could have given her. The bonding was held when the worst of the cold had passed, not a coronation this time, something quieter, simpler in its bones, though the same great hall held it, and the same 400 chairs were filled, and the same players sat in the high gallery and let their slow music drift down over the gathered heads. Maren stood in the arched doorway where she had once stood as a careful, guarded stranger braced for a tribunal, and she let herself look at the room properly, the way she had not let herself look at anything that first day, beyond what her training told her to catalog. It was the same hall. That was what struck her hardest. The same vaulted stone ceiling, lost in its high, soft dark where the candlelight could not climb. The same colored windows along the eastern wall, throwing their long, jeweled stripes across the marble floor. The same scent on the air, cedar smoke, and underneath it that softer thing, rain on warm stone, the scent that had reached across a crowded room and undone her on the worst and the best day of her life. The same room. A different woman standing in its doorway. She thought of the version of herself who had stood here before. Hands folded too carefully. Heart locked in its small dark box. A blade kept sharp for the hand that held her. That woman had walked into this hall certain of exactly one thing. That her only worth was the cold. And that the cold was the price of being kept. Marin felt no contempt for her now, only a kind of tenderness, the way a person feels towards someone who survived a long winter the only way she knew how. You did the best you could, she thought, toward that guarded woman in the doorway. You kept us both alive until someone finally looked. The banners had changed. Deep green and black still hung from every pillar. The wolf of this territory worked in gold thread, catching the flames and seeming to run. But beside each one now hung a second banner, smaller, in a deep crimson. She knew the way she knew her own pulse, her own landsmark, worked in dark thread, glowing where the candlelight touched it. The two colors looked right together. She had not expected that. The first time she had stood in this hall, she could not have imagined her own colors on these walls as anything but a conquest, an intrusion, a thing forced into a place that did not want it. Now they simply hung side by side, the way two true things can stand next to each other without either one having to shrink to make room. Beside, not before, not below. It had become the quiet shape of everything she touched this winter. Marin wore crimson and gold, not her traveling tunic, not the armor of a woman braced to be sent away again the moment her work was done. A gown, fitted, the same deep red, with gold worked at the collar and the hem. Her own land's pendant rested at her throat, the way it always had. The one thing she had carried unchanged through all of it. And her hair was loose, unbraided, falling past her shoulders in dark waves she had spent 10 years pinning back. Because loose hair was a thing a woman could be teased for, or judged for, or read as soft. And softness had always been the one thing she could not be caught wearing in a room full of men deciding what she was for. Linnea had looked at her that morning, at the loose, dark waves of it, and had not said a single word about taste or propriety, or what the other delegations would murmur. She had only said, very quietly, "There you are." The same 3 words Soren had said when she first opened her eyes in his arms. And Marin had understood, hearing them a second time, what those words had always meant. Not a greeting, a recognition. The sight of a person finally arriving as the whole of themselves, with nothing folded away. She had spent so long being the careful, useful, narrowed version of herself that she had half forgotten there was a woman living underneath it. There you are. There she was. At the top of the dais, Soren waited. He wore the dark ceremonial clothing again. The mark of the Alpha settled over him. His hair brushed back from the hard, quiet lines of his face. But he was not the unreadable figure she had watched fill the space above this same platform on the first day. The man whose breathing she had read from 30 feet away in a crowded room. He was watching her come, and his expression, even from across the long hall, Even through the colored light and the cedar smoke and the 400 turned heads, was the same one he had worn the very first time he ever laid eyes on her. Recognition. As though, across all that space, in a hall packed with every face that mattered in 2 whole territories, there was still only one quiet thing in the room, and it was her. She began to walk. Alder Hale stood near the dais, his steward's chain across his chest, his face arranged into its careful, practiced blankness. As she passed him, he caught her eye, and the blankness broke, just for her, just for a heartbeat, into something that held the whole long winter inside it. The hours he had stood by while a new alpha refused to set an unconscious woman down. The dawn he had carried the worst news he could carry and tried, in his careful way, to soften the blade of it. The morning he had watched a foreign envoy walk alone into a hostile council and walk back out of it herd. He gave her a single nod. It was a small thing. A tilt of an old gray head, but it carried an entire sentence inside it, and the sentence was, near enough, "I told you so." And beneath that, gentler, "You have done well." And beneath that, gentlest of all, the thing she had spent her whole life waiting for someone to say and had stopped believing anyone ever would. Welcome. She nearly lost her composure right there in the middle of the great hall over a steward's nod. She did not. Some habits are too old to break in a single season, and some she had decided she would keep, because they were hers now and not a cage someone else had built around her. She kept her chin level. She kept walking. Linnea sat in the front row of the delegate seats, in the very place along the eastern wall where the 2 of them had once sat as careful strangers, bracing for a tribunal, reading the room for threats. Her oldest companion was openly crying, and just as openly pretending she was not, her chin high, her eyes streaming, her hands folded in her lap with a dignity that fooled no one in the hall and was somehow all the more moving for how badly it was failing. Marin caught her eye and very nearly laughed. Linnea mouthed something that might have been "Go on, you fool," and might have been "I am so glad," and was, knowing Linnea, certainly both at once. Wren sat beside her, safe, warm, watching her sister climb the steps of a dais in a foreign hall with her hair down and her head high, seeing, perhaps for the first time in either of their lives, that the woman who had spent every year keeping everyone else safe was, at long last, being held by something larger and steadier than her own tired grip. Marin reached the top of the steps. Soren extended his hand. She took it, and the bond crested between them, one final time. The great slow wave she had first felt rise in this very room on the day she fainted at his feet. It rose now the same way it had then, from somewhere behind her ribs, warm, vast, filling her all the way to the edges of herself. But it did not break this time. It did not knock her down, or steal the breath from her lungs, or narrow her sight to a single point of green. It crested, and it held, and then it settled into something steady, a rhythm. A shore reached at last, after all its long searching. It was not going to recede. She understood that now, with her hand in his and the colored light falling across them both. After all the long years of holding the whole sea back, she had finally stopped fighting the pull of it. And the pull, it turned out, had only ever been trying to carry her home. The officiant began to speak, the old words, the promises, the vows that bound two lives into one shared weather, for all the seasons left to them. Marin listened to them the way she had once listened to the coronation rites, a part of her mind forever doing the careful work it had been built to do. Cataloging, noting, but the larger part of her was simply, fully present, in her own body, in the warmth of his hand around hers, in the scent of cedar and rain on stone, in the impossible, ordinary fact of standing in this room, the very same room, transformed beyond all recognition, while every stone of it stayed exactly the same. For the record, she murmured to him, low, beneath the officiant's voice, my king did send the recall order. In the end, the corner of Soren's mouth moved. I know. He named me permanent envoy after... I know that too. It is a great honor, she said gravely. A standing post, the first of its kind in the history of either land. And the holder of it, Soren said, is, I am reliably told, an excellent diplomat. The very best, she agreed. She once talked a hostile council out of a war, with her hair coming undone, and a recall order with her own name on it sitting open on the table in front of her. She did. He turned his head and looked at her, and the gravity slipped from his face, and something raw and warm rose up underneath it. I stood beside her and watched her do it. And somewhere in the middle of it, I understood a thing I had been taught wrong my whole life, which was that a leader's strength is in what he can hold down, his face, his wanting, the people around him. His thumb moved, slow, across the back of her hand. It is not. The strongest thing I have ever done in all my years was to sit in that council with my hands at my sides and let you save us both, when every part of me was begging to stand up and do it for you. Marin's eyes burned. You wanted to stand in front of me in every single moment. The bond was howling at me too. His voice dropped low. And I have never been more grateful for anything than that I did not. Because if I had, the room would have seen a man shielding his prize. And what they saw instead was the truth, which was that you were never anyone's prize. He held her eyes, steady and certain. You were the one doing the saving. You always had been. The rest of us only ever needed to be wise enough to step out of your way and let you. The officiant came then to the binding words, and here, in the heart of the old rite, was the line Marin had braced herself for, the one that had stopped her cold the first time she read the ceremony through, the line where each named the other as their own. Mine. The word that should have made her angry, the very first time he ever said it to her, in a cold courtyard with a carriage waiting. The word she had spent 10 hard years fighting, in every room where a man had looked at her and seen an instrument to be used and set back down. The word that had always meant property, claim, a hand reaching for the blade to keep it. She had thought, reading the rite, that she would simply have to make her peace with it, Swallow it whole. Let it mean the old hard thing one final time, for the sake of everything good that came with it. But when the moment came, and the officiant turned to her, and she looked at the man whose hand she held, the word had changed. It had been changing all winter, she realized, slowly, the way ice changes back into water, without ever quite letting you watch the moment it turns. He had told her, on the cold floor of a corridor with 2 inches of oak between them, that he meant it the way the sun belongs to the morning, not the way a man owns a horse. She had not believed him then. She had filed it away as the pretty kind of thing a man says when he wants something badly. She believed it now, because she had watched him prove it, over and over, in the only language that ever counts. She had watched him let the door stand open. She had watched him send the carriage back to the stables empty rather than chain it shut. She had watched him keep his hands at his sides while she walked alone into the most dangerous room in 2 territories. He had shown her, in the end, what the word was supposed to mean all along. Not I own you. Not you are useful to me. Only this. I will stay. I will be the one who does not set you down. Mine. The way 2 banners hang side by side, and neither one has to shrink. So when the officiant turned to her, and the great hall held its breath, and 400 faces waited in the colored light, Maren said the word, and it did not taste like a cage. It tasted like a door she had finally chosen, with her own hand, to leave standing open. When it was done, when the vows were spoken and the 2 banners had been formally joined, and the hall erupted into a roar that shook the old stone the way it had on the day of his crowning, Soren drew her in close. His hand came up to the back of her head, his fingers threading into the loose, dark waves of her hair, exactly the way they had on the cold floor of that corridor on the night everything changed. He pressed his forehead to hers, and beneath the roar of 400 voices, in the small private space between 2 people that no ceremony and no council and no crowd could ever reach into, he said the only word that had ever truly mattered between them. Not mine, this time. He had learned better than that, and he had learned it from her. Stay, he said, the same word he had said in the courtyard, in the cold, on the night she had nearly climbed into the carriage and disappeared the way useful women were always supposed to disappear. The word that had once felt like a hook, a claim, a thing she had to brace herself against and fight. It did not feel like that now. It felt like an open hand, held out, asking nothing she did not want to give. Maren thought of the girl she had once been, the one who learned far too young to sit very straight and want very little. The one who folded herself smaller and smaller to fit through the narrow gap the world left open for useful women, and who was praised for the folding, and who mistook the praise for love, because no one had ever once shown her the difference between the 2. She thought of all the rooms she had quietly walked out of to keep other people safe. She thought of the recall order, and the empty chair Drake had built his entire morning around, and the single moment when she had finally decided to stop disappearing. And she thought of a man who had held her for 3 hours without moving, on the most important day of his life, because letting her go was the one thing in all the world he was not willing to do. She lifted her free hand and rested it against the line of his jaw, the way she had on that cold floor, and she felt the warmth of him move through the bond like sunlight, reaching, at long last, all the way down to the floor of a deep and freezing sea. She had spent the whole of her life being valued for what she could do. She would spend the rest of it being loved for who she was. To be useful is to be wanted for what you give. To be loved is to be wanted for what you are, on the days you have nothing left to give at all. She had finally learned the difference, and she had finally let herself become the second thing. "Stay," he had said, and in the great hall, in front of 400 witnesses, with her hair down and her own colors on the walls, and her sister safe in the front row, and her voice her own at last, holding the hand of a man who had once held her for 3 hours rather than set her down. Barren Cole stayed. She stayed, and the sound of the crowd rose and broke around them like surf, and the colored light fell through the eastern windows in long jeweled stripes across the marble, and the cedar smoke drifted up and up toward the high dark ceiling where no light ever reached, and the warmth in her chest, the thing she had spent an entire lifetime holding still, holding back, holding quiet, hummed at last with no wall left anywhere inside her to hold it down. It was not a wave. It never had been. It was simply her own heart, finally allowed to beat as loud as it had always, secretly, wanted to, and no one, ever again, was going to ask her to keep it quiet.